Good afternoon. Call to order the briefing meeting for Tuesday, May 21st. The time is 3:11. I'd like to ask if we have any items for good of the order before we get started. Okay, we'll jump right in with the Student Code of Conduct, PK through 5, 6 through 12, and then Adult Services.
All right, Ms. Patrica, members of the board, Dr. Atkins, it's our privilege to bring to you the Code of Conduct for students, the 2019-20 versions for both secondary and elementary. And we know that you're probably missing the students that presented the last time. We're missing them today, too. Two of them have graduated, so we're
They did.
We just wanted to bring this back to you today and reiterate some of the changes that we have made. This version does separate a large chunk of information that goes into the parent and family guide. It includes positive expectations and more focus on MTSS tiered behavior interventions. It expands the explanation of search and seizure and improves sections with links to statutory policy references and/or online resources. And it has removed various forms that will be available to our families through Focus electronically to automate those particular processes.
Okay, two other changes related to disruption on campus. Moving forward, principals will be required to give me a call first prior to any coding. It's been misused, and in my opinion, Mr. Williams, I think he left the room, but on Wednesday afternoons, we've run into a lot of situations where cases have been overturned because the incident wasn't coded properly. One example, we had a fight in a classroom that was coded disruption on campus. Parents came in and appealed and won the appeal based on it should have been coded fight rather than disruption on campus. So they've got to call and check with me first. Also, the principals requested with regards to insubordination that was missing. They wanted a first gross insubordination to rise to a level 3 with after consultation with me. So some of the examples giving, a student could be insubordinate in a lunchroom to a school administrator in front of 500 to 600 students, could be insubordinate in a courtyard in front of 1,000 students. They wanted that to rise to a level 3 with the caveat that they consult with me prior to that. So those are two other changes.
In addition to that, you'll also see that the, particularly our ESE students, the suspension cannot go beyond 10 days. We've got the 5-day suspension so that we are working not to exceed the 10 days that are required by federal law to have the, not to exceed the 10 days. So working specifically to make sure that we are all on the same page about that particular element as well.
Another update, we took a road trip Friday, the three of us, went out to the Police Academy and Fort Myers Tech. We found a wonderful space at Fort Myers Tech, lots of room for expansion if needed. We hope we don't need the extra room, but perfect setup for a prevention center. The bus drop-off, supervision, it's all doable, and we're excited about that moving forward.
So it will allow the students that would still be using the transportation that would have gone to Success Academy, they will be just dropped off at a different location right within that very same area. We will be able to provide the meals and those types of things without too much transportation. And so we feel like that it is an opportunity, again, to provide that preventive measure and to address concerns within a 20-day window as opposed to having an extended amount of time at the Success Academy.
The place is there, some minor modifications, some flooring and some desks, but we left out of there with thumbs up. This is going to be perfect situation moving forward.
Do I have any questions or comments? Ms. Gittens?
Oh, she can go first.
Ms. Jordan?
Okay, my question is regarding the 10 days suspension. What prohibits them from calling a parent to pick up a child every day?
We're working on that. We have had continued ESE training once a week, but we are also, I had an opportunity to speak with Ms. Duncan this morning. We are working to have a principal lead, very similar to our peer collaborative principal that we've identified, that we would have one principal that would serve in that role as well and help to share best practices with our other principals. We recognize that that is a practice that we need to make sure that we are not utilizing, and that is something that we will be addressing.
Okay, thank you. And so how do we keep track of that? Because I know that it's federal regarding the 10 days. but
Not
how
only do we
keep
have
track of
the-
that other issue?
Yes, ma'am. Not only do we have the suspension piece, but we've got the attendance pieces to track as well. And so as we continue to work through our ABCs, the attendance, behavior, and classroom success, we are able to see at a point during the day if a student is no longer at the school, and we can begin to track that. And we track that data at the district level as well as at the school level.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gittens?
You mentioned the first gross insubordination would be a level 3. Concern about that is, I can see, emotions being high because a student is acting out and you want to remove them to keep them from escalating other students. That would come through you as well?
Yes. The phone call needs to come to me first. Keep in mind, with a level 3 offense, it isn't an automatic direct placement or an alternative placement to success. There are other options within level 3's out-of-school suspension. But the principals, they spoke loud and clear throughout the year that there were a couple really high-profile incidents at schools where they felt they wanted at least to get the folks to the table for the due process hearing to be able to talk about the incident. So there's an asterisk in there, they've got to give me a buzz first, let's talk through this. So that's where that's coming from, and
Okay.
I can remember situations where, one kid's being insubordinate and hundreds of kids are watching, and you really got to be able to set the tone there and send the message that it's not okay.
No, and I understand. I
yeah.
just wanted to hear
It's got to come through me.
what would happen, because that could have a tendency to
And
be
to your,
abused.
to your point, Ms. Gittens, that is one of the pieces of why it needs to come through someone here.
Thank you.
Because you're right, there can be times where their emotions are high all the way
Adrenaline's
around, and we
pumping.
don't want to be reactive. We want to make sure that we are making clear decisions about any consequence that we're having with a student. And so that is an opportunity that in something that would be elevated to this particular level, kind of as a direct stop, then we need to make sure that we are having the opportunity to talk through that with them.
And I have one more question, and I guess after having taught, I should know this, but I don't. If a student is assigned to Success Academy or the new Prevention Center, how are they transported? Are parents required to take them?
Until a bus stop is established. So the beauty here is the students are going to be transported as they would if they were going to attend the Success Academy. In fact, they're going to be on the same buses. The drop-off will occur at Success. Next stop will be at Prevention Center. So zero added cost to the district.
Okay.
Ms. Vaughn?
Yeah, I wanted a little further clarification on the insubordination. Now, is that just, okay, so in a situation where there are a lot of students around, is that just insubordinate to an administrator, or does that include teachers and support personnel that are,
Staff member.
okay.
Staff member.
Excuse me.
And it's not, maybe a half a dozen incidents this year. I don't want you all to think there's something that's huge, but there were a few incidents, and then a couple that we could have handled, as Dr. Creel so eloquently answered, we as adults could have handled better. So that's where the conversation will come in. Let's talk through it. How did it start? Why did we end up here? So.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes, thank you. Could you briefly address success placement, Success Academy placement versus Prevention Center? Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, let me jump in. You guys can jump in if you want. First offense, alcohol or drugs. Principal has two options. One option is the SAFE program as it exists now. That's through the Hanley Foundation. The principal can suspend up to 5 days That's one change. Last year was 10. Up to 5 days. There are 3 counseling sessions that the student has to attend. We have one in each zone. It's after school hours. One-on-one for the first, one-on-one for the second. The third session, parents have to attend. All right, that's an option for principals. It's on the table. First offense, alcohol or drugs. SAFE program. Option 2 would be the prevention center. 20 days, we provide transportation. Students charged with the first offense, marijuana, whatever, drugs or alcohol, will not be recommended to the Success Academy. That's out of the picture. Okay, selling drugs, different story.
Okay, then when you have placement at an alternative placement such as Success Academy, can you address the issue of suspensions from that alternative placement?
We would hope that students who attend Success Academy would never be suspended. All right, the district has provided administration with funds to run a PM program, but do understand, I was a principal, and many of you all were as well, or school administrators or teachers, that there are times when students have to be removed from school for extreme acts of violence. So it's inevitable. If you have a fight, there's injuries, there needs to be some type of cooling off period that OSS can never go away, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so that would be the reason, it would be extreme acts of
Yes.
violence.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have a record about how many of those have occurred in Success Academy this past school year?
Not offhand, but certainly,
We'll gather
can
that
get it for
data,
you, yeah.
and we do know that this is an opportunity for us to improve upon for next year. I think that we've got some guidelines that need to be in place, and I know that those are conversations that we are currently having, but that is an opportunity for improvement, because if a child has been removed from a school, they are there for a purpose, and that particular center is set up to meet the needs of at-risk students. There could be a situation an extreme situation that a student needs to be removed from that environment. But it should not be a common occurrence as a manner.
for like level 2, insubordination, disrespect, profanity, that should never, ever occur.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So then, in follow-up to that, when we have wraparound services at the Success Academy, and those will stay intact?
Yes.
And then at the Prevention Center, we'll have 3 counseling sessions, 1 to include the parent.
Safe route.
Does that, any of that?
Let me jump on that real quick. We're going to shift, Success had a full-time counselor from the Hanley Center. We're
Yes.
going to shift that person over to the Prevention Center.
Oh, okay, okay.
full-time. Now, with that said, if students who land at Success for drug sale, distribution, repeat offenses, we certainly could make sure that that child is exposed to counseling.
Connected to the services.
Connected, because they're right next door, which is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Right, okay. So at Success Academy with the wraparound services, we now have kids who have issues with substance abuse, and they're receiving counseling in the school environment. Do they also receive referrals to outside agencies such as Salus Care?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay,
And part of the goal moving forward with the Prevention Center is to bring outside agencies in, guest speakers or whatnot, teenagers from AA, and you, the superintendent, anybody that wants to, meet with the kids. And we talked about the grad coach coming in, looking at credits, and just making the kids feel connected and have a plan upon their exit.
so I guess what I'm trying to get at is the ultimate goal for kids who have substance abuse issues, treatment. I mean, 3 counseling sessions is nice, but, it takes more than that. So are they then referred for treatment is my question.
From the Prevention Center, we can't necessarily say that they would go to treatment, but we certainly can bring the Hanley Foundation into them to provide those counseling services that are there. We can make referrals to Salus Care and other organizations as appropriate. And that is the purpose behind this, is how can we catch this early before it becomes a habitual thing?
Right. Well, I mean, and a first offense still might be a habit for that particular
Correct.
person.
Just got caught. Exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse me, I have one more question. Since they're only there for 20 days and going back to their school, will they have some connection, let's say, with the counselors or someone at the schools to help that reentry be smoother?
One of the things that has worked really well at Success Academy is that our high school and middle school administrators and others that have gone into Success Academy, we would want to see that same practice occur in the Prevention Center as well, so that we are kind of seeing a marrying, so that as students are transitioning in and out, that we have given them a bridge for success to transition in and out with that.
Awesome, thank you.
Is there anything?
Great questions, by the way.
Thank you.
Other questions or
I
comments?
just thought, what kind of special training or qualifications or experience do the teachers have in Success Academy and Prevention Academy? In other words, how are they selected to be in those positions?
Good shot.
Well, at this time, that's certainly something we want to address. It's been a topic of our conversation going forward, especially with the Prevention Center, in working with students with that kind of addiction problems and with maladaptive behavior problems. So we're looking at what do we need to do to make sure that they're well-versed in PBIS basics, and looking at can they work with children, coach them, counsel them. So we are looking at what kind of qualifications do we need to make sure are in place.
Okay, but aren't those people do they already know that they've been selected to be at the Prevention Center, or?
We haven't.
No, ma'am.
We will
Okay.
be utilizing, because of staffing, and we're reducing the number of students that will be at Success Academy, so we will be utilizing staff that is currently at Success Academy to move to the Prevention Center, but that staff has not been identified yet. But in regards to what you were saying, teachers are selected based on the criteria that they need for content mastery at middle school and high school, and yet they have some at-risk factors. So we recognize that one of the things that we need to do in order to support the teachers and to provide the best element that we can for our students is to provide additional professional learning for those teachers.
Okay, and I'm just going to comment that I see that as an extremely important piece, because we can have the best counselors and all of that, but if the teachers aren't well-versed and specially trained, and I would think that they would have to have probably a preschool training on, with the counselors, and because this is really going to be a very, very different experience. Even moving from Success Academy into Prevent, because it's kind of, it is different. And actually, I guess I'm going to admit that I don't know what kind of special training the Success Academy teachers have had in the past. How have they been selected? Are they just somebody the principal knows and likes and wants to bring aboard, or how does that work?
I don't think that it's based on principles of who they know and who they like. I think they interview based on the criteria. If you have to teach a math class, you're going to have math certification and so forth. And that's what's needed, just like at any school. And so that is how they have primarily selected teachers in order to fill those teaching spots. But we also recognize that we have the opportunity to provide support to our teachers so that they can know how to best meet the social and emotional needs of our students. It's not just about academics, but how we reach into the social and emotional
Okay,
elements.
and I hope that moving forward, we really go down strong in giving them that kind of support and special training. I understand they have to know their content, but the other part, is very important as far as I'm concerned.
And I appreciate your feedback. We are in the process of continuing to upgrade and make innovations and to move forward, and that's what we're doing.
Great. Happy to hear that. Thank you.
ma'am.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes. So then, will teachers who might transition from Success Academy to the Prevention Center, will they have an opportunity to self-identify? I mean, I would think that having someone who would be interested in working in prevention and early intervention have an opportunity to apply for that? Or will they be identified otherwise?
We certainly will look and try to offer that if possible. I'm going to look to Dr. Pruitt here to see if there's some additional information there, but I think we also have to look at certification, areas of certification, and make sure that we are not leaving Success Academy in a situation that they would not have a certified teacher in the areas that are needed. Remember, we're going to utilize E-2020,
Yes.
which has the certified teacher in place.
Right.
And so it doesn't require to have the certification in all of those areas. So we don't want to leave one school in a bind by who would be
Right.
going.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Any questions or comments on the adult student code of conduct? I think we're good. Thank you. Next item is sales tax bond and operational audit. And this is allotted for 5 minutes. Dr. Atkins, do we have more explanation than 5 minutes?
Yeah, I anticipate it's going to take a little bit longer than that.
And I'd
Yes.
like to suggest upfront that I'll give each board member an opportunity to speak, and then one opportunity for follow-up, and then I'll close discussion on this. I'd also like to suggest that we implement that going forward according to Robert's Rules of Order, and I plan to make that motion tonight.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies. I have to start by saying, Dr. Desamores, that seeing you sit in that seat is exactly where you're supposed to be, so.
That's that's very nice. Thank you. I appreciate it. I feel like it is, so I appreciate that. Thank you. So, good afternoon, Ms. Patrica, members of the board, Dr. Atkins. We're here today to give you an update on the sales tax bond, and then we'll move into the discussion about the operational audit. We did, my understanding is, have a briefing with you, and I believe Ford and Associates, our investment advisors, came and briefed at that time. It's been a little while. We're ready to take some action, so we wanted to come back to you, give you the update, and then tell you what next steps are. So with that.
Yes, I just want to remind you, on December 11th, Ford and Associates came in and they talked to you about the different types of funding that was available to school districts. And in that, they did talk about the sales tax revenue bond, and that's what we would like to proceed with. Some of the points from that is that the bonds are backed by proceeds from the sales tax, so there's no assets that are backing that. The ability to use that has to be in the referendum, and it was. Let's see, let me look at that. I talked about that, okay. So we're looking at about $105 million worth of sales tax bonds that we'd like to go out for. And at that point in time, after the debt was paid on the yearly basis, it was going to leave about $44 million for other things for sales tax. But since then, we briefed you on March 12th. I came back and briefed you on some updated revenue estimates, which increased that, so there would be more left at the end after the bond was paid. There were updated interest estimates in that. We added Lehigh Senior High to the sales tax, to be paid from sales tax instead of going out for a capital COPS for that. And we updated the construction projects at that time. And if you remember, we also presented the new dashboard, sales tax dashboard, to you all at that time as well, which I'm proud to say is up and running and offering great information to our local individuals.
So that was all of our past discussion. Now, the new progress related to this is for our sales tax bond. We did have our investment advisors release that RFP. Through that process, we had 7 respondents, and 3 firms are being brought to the board for recommendation in terms of heading up our sales tax bond effort. We've got Bank of America Merrill Lynch as the lead manager, and then JP Morgan and Raymond James also working in conjunction with Bank of America Merrill Lynch. As noted here, our financial advisors, along with staff here, determined that the 3 firms that we are representing or recommending to you to handle our sales tax bond have a very strong presence in the state of Florida, and not only in the state, but within Florida school districts in particular, and also with sales tax bond in particular. So they've got some in-depth experience that we'll be able to draw from. So that recommendation will be coming forth to you on June 4 on the agenda. So we just wanted to brief that and open it up for any questions related to this issue.
Questions, anyone, Ms. Gittens?
The last time we were briefed, I recall that Lehigh Senior was 13 million. And on here it mentions 15. Can you address that?
Yes, if you, that was the December 11th briefing, that it was 15 million, and since then they've updated the cost estimates and it's 13 million now. A little over 13 million.
Can I ask, Dr. Atkins, we get those updates monthly from Mr. Rickenbacker, right?
Rickenbacker, yes.
Other questions?
So I'm sorry, just to clarify what you're seeing, we went through past discussions that had happened at those points in times. At that time, the past discussion was that those 2 projects we would possibly go out for bond for. That was the discussion of how much that project was at that point in time. And since then, that estimate has been updated, so our sales tax bond will be updated for the appropriate amount for those 2 projects.
Other questions or comments?
All right. All right, if no further questions, thank you. I'm going to ask for Susan to come up so that we can brief on the operational audit. And I have a packet of information that I wanted to pass around, so while Susan's coming up.
Do you want me to pass that around?
Yeah, thank you. This is one for Jen. Board Attorney.
Thank you.
I'm really glad Trey's not in the room as you hand me.
He would go off if he was in the room. Okay, so the package you have in front of you, and again, my apologies to Trey. We have the first 3 pages that you have there is a kind of a Excel spreadsheet that it says School District of Lee County Update on Audit Report 2019-026 on the top. Wanted to first give you an update on the audit that is going on right now, and then talk a little bit about the one that we have upcoming. So on this spreadsheet, you have 3 pages that list out the 15 findings that were noted within the audit and the update of each of those at this point in time. For findings number 1 and 2, which were the findings with the biggest financial impact associated with, you see that the updates for both of those are the same, that our staff here is preparing a response for those to send to DOE by the appointed timeline. DOE gave us a timeline of May 31st for finding number 2, which was the letter that we received on Friday. And then finding number 1 really doesn't have a deadline to it, but our intent and our hope is that we get that information to them by the 1st. But that was the deadline that we imposed on ourselves, not one that was received from DOE. Then as you go down the list on district finding number 3, you'll see that we have the update on that. The DOE confirmed that appropriate corrective measures have been taken on March 28th. Within your packet, the first pages after this Excel spreadsheet listing all of the findings, you'll see that there are 2 different letters from the DOE. One of them dated March 28th, confirming the closeout of finding number 3. And then there's another letter from the auditor, from the DOE, confirming closeout of findings number 13 through 15. We get documentation from the DOE when those things are closed out, so that's why we've updated number 3. For findings number 4 through 8, you'll see that we have given some process documentation changes and certain documentation to the DOE, and we're awaiting response from them. And that's, basically the process that we'll go through within the operational audit. They'll send us some information, ask us for documentation or backup. We'll send it to them, and then we await their response to see whether the finding is closed out, whether they ask for something else, or whether they ask for some different kind of corrective measure. So you'll see for 4 through 8, we have submitted some information to the DOE, and we are awaiting that response. Within your packet, you'll see the letters that have been sent to DOE that kind of update where, those responses that have been given to them for those particular findings. Now, the information that you have in your packet is only that information that had been sent to DOE since December. That was the request that came through, what we had been asked for. So, of course, there had been, information and, messages that were going back and forth between the auditors and the district before then, but the things you see in your packet are those items that happened in December and on. In finding number 9 and 10, we are working on enhancements to our processes and procedures, and that review now is still active. So we are still in that process, and we'll be finalizing those hopefully very soon, but we have not been asked for any additional information from the DOE for those at this time. And then you'll see for findings 13 through 15, as I mentioned before, we got documentation from the DOE that those findings had been closed out. Now, at the bottom of page, the last pages of this, we kind of outline some steps, number 1 through 11, related to the audit process, just so that you get an overview of what it looks like and what that audit will look like that's getting ready to start next week, which we'll talk about in just a bit. So it starts out with an entrance conference that's attended by the superintendent, the board chair, and key personnel within the district. The auditors at that point will lay out the types of information that they are asking for, things that they will sample, information that they need from us, and probably an appropriate timeline of when they believe that they will be here. After that, they continue with their field work and present preliminary findings, and from there, that's where the communication starts back and forth. Once they present preliminary findings, we do have the opportunity to provide information to them that hopefully will eliminate those findings. But if they don't, the auditors will take that information, assess whether they believe findings should be eliminated or not. And once they come up with what they believe is a preliminarily final report, they will present those findings to the district at an exit conference that is, again, attended by the superintendent, key personnel, and the board chair. The auditors will also present their final report to the Auditor General, and the Auditor General does have liberty to eliminate findings based on our information as well if he or she chooses to do so. After the Auditor General reviews and finalizes the report, the district receives that formal audit from the Auditor General, and we are then asked to present a formal response to the Auditor General. And based on what the nature of the findings are, then the Department of Education will follow up on those findings as well. And we will present backup and information to the Department of General, in which at the Department of Education, in which at the end of that process, the Department of Education will determine what corrective action, if any, needs to be taken. So I just wanted to give an overview of the general audit process because it can be a lengthy process. There can be a lot of information that goes back and forth between the agencies, and many times we don't necessarily have an indication of when we're going to get that information until it comes from wherever it's coming from, either the Auditor General or the Department of Education. So hopefully that was a good overview of the process, and I will open it up. This was our current audit. I will open it up for questions before I talk about the next audit that's coming up.
Ms. Gibbons.
Well, first off, I want to Thank you. I made this request of you just 2 days ago, and you guys have put it all together very well in the last 2 days, and I appreciate that, and the superintendent's help in getting this out. I really think that this will help us to, with transparency and knowing exactly what's going on and at what time, which is, why I suggested it. Can I ask one other thing with it, though?
Yes, ma'am.
When this all began, I believe was September of 2018, when 2016-026 began, if that is correct?
That's when the audit concluded, so it had been going on for a year. We had the audit for 6 months prior. It was concluded, it went to the Auditor General. The Auditor General decided to add several more findings after we had gone for the sales tax, and then in September, we received the final report from the state.
Perhaps then when it first started, maybe not as detailed as having all of the attachments necessarily, but maybe have them in a file in case we did want to see them from the time that it began up until where we are now, where you started now.
Having correspondence in a file, is that what you mean? Or
No, I'm not saying necessarily the correspondence, but just adding it to our timeline here.
Okay.
This is when it began.
Oh, okay.
And each step along the way. And then if someone wants the correspondence, then they can request that as necessary.
So
At
add a
least it would give us
timeline.
the full picture of the timeline. And
Yes.
thank you so much again. This really is helpful.
Yes, okay, and we can do that. We can add the timeline. One thing you did request was that, now this is just a paper that you have, but you requested a Google Doc so that y'all could pop in and see the update of that, which we can create that and put that out there. So that'll be our next step with taking this information and just putting it in the Google Doc so you can see the updates as we go along.
Okay, and I don't know if that means that, you have to be able to sign in to look at it. I know it's public record. I'm not quite sure where that fine line finishes. In other words, sometimes you do Google Docs and certain people have access to that document. Can we do that? I don't know if that's...
I believe so, because that would just be a piece of information that we're giving to you. So I don't believe that there's a problem, but we'll check in with it.
Maybe to check with Trey on that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
We would
thank
just be creating it and making sure to give the rights to view for everybody that would need to view it.
Yeah,
It is proper permissions. It should be manageable.
Yeah.
okay. That would be awesome. Thank
Okay.
you so much.
All right, yeah, sure.
Great work.
Other questions or comments, Ms. Vaughn?
Thank you for all the work that you put into this. What Ms. Gittens just said half answered what I was going to say, which is it would have been helpful for me to have this in advance, at least a day in advance, so I could ask any possible questions that I had it, but now I understand. That said, moving forward, I feel like we haven't always gotten, and I don't know if this is your office, Dr. Adkins' office, that we haven't gotten regular updates on things. I know when I first saw the letter on the $3.9 million, I was kind of blindsided by that because I was under the impression that we had cleared some of these hurdles. So I was somewhat surprised, and I know the district got out the talking points, and you made a statement and all of that. But I think for transparency, and I think also for the flow of information and communication that we've really been trying to work on, that timely updates on things would be very helpful. At least it would be very helpful to me.
And with the, I certainly understand the request. As it relates to the letter,
Yeah.
I think as Dr. Desamores had indicated, we're not always aware when we're going to receive those letters either. So truth was, I learned of it from Chair Gittens at the State of the Schools that we had received that letter. I didn't know that we had received it. But that is normal and typical. I actually reached out to the Chancellor, Jacob Olivo, and had talked a little bit about the concern that we had experienced here at the district with some of the news press coverage and some board member concern. He said, this is just a regular step in the process. And, that we would, when they get ready to follow up on something, they typically send us a letter, they give us a deadline, and then we work with them to meet that deadline as best we can. So this is, our intention on this is I indicated to Mr. Levo that we would be working collaboratively with the Department of Education, that we want to fulfill the request as best we can, and we do feel that we do have a good case in many of these on these issues, but there are some that the department may not disagree or may not agree with us on, and we will certainly work with them to comply. And I don't know if you're in your presentation you're going to talk about some of the ambiguity around the language as it relates to capital versus operational expenditures, which is what part of the issue is here with finding number 2. But that's something that I think is something we find across other districts. This isn't the only district that has this particular finding. Just like the impact fee, that's another one that other districts across the state have, and we're all kind of working through and trying to get some direction from the Department of Education. So moving forward, we'll be in full compliance and we'll have this finding show up.
Yeah. So sure, we can go.
Before we get to that, Ms. Vaughn, may I ask you, would it be helpful for, when we're in an audit, to have a monthly or every 6-week update like we get from Mr. Rickenbacker for capital projects?
As a matter of fact, I was going to follow up to ask Dr. Atkins one more thing. So now I have an understanding of how surprising it was to everybody, let alone those of us on the board that read it. But moving forward, as you're working through various responses, what Ms. Patrica just said, that would be very helpful, that we wouldn't have to say, would you give us an update? What's going on? And I mean, I know that when we keep asking, that puts more burden on staff, but if we just established it as a weekly, even if it's, no change from last week or something like that, that would keep all of us from saying, well, what's going on with that? Does that make sense? Does that
That
sound?
makes sense.
Does that sound doable?
That sounds very doable. I think it would be rather simple just to give the board a monthly update, particularly now that we're headed into this next audit. So that'll keep you apprised of where we are. I'd be happy to do so.
Good, thank you.
Did you have other questions or comments before we turn it back over to?
No, that was what I needed to follow up on.
Dr. Desmores?
One of the things I wanted to share with you is a little bit more information about finding 2, which has recently come back into discussion. The question about finding 2 is, did we use the appropriate category of funds for paying for certain services that were required? So the bottom line is we had items that needed to be attended to, such as trip and fall hazards, removal of toxic paints, and so forth. And the legislature has certain laws about, is it maintenance or custodial support? So services were required to be performed to protect our students, and they were performed, and we paid for them, if you might want to consider it, out of one checking account. And the question on the table is, was that the appropriate checking account, or should we have used the other checking account? So, in fact, we've had this finding many years ago, and the state came back, and when we gave our discussion, they said, you're right, that it's a gray area. It could be maintenance or custodial. We'll let it go as maintenance this time. And then the next year, they came back and they said, no, looking at it again, different staff, we think it's custodial now. So we've had the state flip-flop 3 or 4 times with us on this, and in the past 2 audit years that were performed, there are 5 other school districts that had similar or the same finding. And I think the bottom line is we are taking care of our students and staff. These were safety issues, trip and fall hazards of sidewalks on fields, removal of paints, et cetera. And the question is, should that be considered a maintenance or custodial? That's really the fine line that's being split here, is which checking account should pay for it, not whether or not the service was required.
One of the things we are quite eager to do is work with our school board attorneys in terms of dicing up this, dissecting this finding and being able to get a good meaty response to send to DOE by May 31st. And so we wanted to bring that for discussion today. We had some direction to wait until the discussion could be had here today to make sure that we could work with our board attorney. So I would like to do that at this point if we could. As you all know, time is of the essence for us in this particular instance, so.
Can we get comments from all board members before we seek?
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
Any other comments?
No.
Questions?
I got it.
I'd like to know, looking at these documents, what...
Excuse
Oh,
me.
go ahead.
That's all right, she can go ahead.
Chair Gittens has a question or comment.
That's okay, are you saying that I can't speak again?
No, you can't. I was giving everybody an opportunity to speak once, and then we were going to come back for follow-up. So I was going to...
Go ahead.
On this timeline thing you gave us, timeline, but what step are we on?
We are on step 9.
Okay, so you mentioned...
We're in between 9 and 10. We're going back and forth on each one. So we're providing requested responses to Department of Education, which we've done and continue to do because they just asked for another. And we're waiting on the Department of Education to rule on our findings. So we're in between 9 and 10.
All right, so as I look at the audit findings, 1 through 15, I recall when you were up in Tallahassee, Dr. Atkins, that one of the gentlemen on the panel asked about time clock procedures. That's an efficiency issue, right? Like, they wanted to make sure that we were keeping proper track of employees coming into the building and we were paying them correctly. That's an efficiency issue, right?
I mean, I think the biggest issue there was when they wanted to make sure that our supervisors were going back and verifying that, people were indeed working the time that they were putting in. Our pay system is pay by exception. I'm sure Susan could explain this probably better than I. And I think that they were looking for probably a more active role for the supervisors just to do that verification process. What we've done since then, after we had our first audit with the new operational audit coming up, is we're working, as you can see, to reestablish what those procedures are, and including our transportation department. One of the things that we're doing there that I've asked Mr. Pratt to look into is a more efficient way to pay our bus operators that I think would be more accurate than what we currently have. So all of those things we're working on right now.
But if we compare that finding, for example, to this finding, this isn't, they're not saying you're wasting money, they're not saying that these things shouldn't have been done, that they're not finding efficiencies here. These are services that had to be provided for students to have safe learning environments.
Right.
And it's really just a matter of where the money comes from, right?
That's right.
All right, and then where will the money come from? We talked about a potential for 3.9 million. We know it's not going to be that high because they're going to allow some of them. Hopefully they'll agree with us. We have no idea what the amount is right now. But if we have to pay, where will that money come from?
So if we have to pay, we do have a reserve set aside at the district level for emergencies such as this, which we may need to tap into. We are also at the end of the school year, so one of the things that we're analyzing right now is what our fund balance looks like, or that is that money that we expected to expend during the year that maybe we did not. So the combination of those two things will be what we look to alleviate the finding or, in the corrective action if the DOE so deems that we need to do so.
So, Dr. Atkins, you referred to the news coverage, and I saw in the news coverage that we would have to pay the money back to the state. That is not what we're dealing with here, right?
Right. What would happen is if we did not do, if you read the letter, it says the Department of Education is going to recommend corrective action. So what Dr. Desamore has just described is what that corrective action would be. If the district chose to ignore that corrective action, which we have no intention of doing, Then what they would do is they would withhold those dollars from the next year's FEFP. We are confident that between fund balance and reserve dollars, we are able to cover this amount if it were even the full amount. And so we, again, like I said, when I contacted the chancellor, I assured him, although I don't think he needed my assurances, he knew quite well that we would be working with them to comply with whatever directive they come up with, as is what's typical in an audit like this. Because first you get the finding from the auditor, and then you work with the Department of Education in terms of what's going to be the final resolution as to each and every one of those findings.
And then my final comment or question, I guess, is we all received an email from Ms. Giovanelli indicating that she had concerns about this. And I would like to talk about the fact that we have hired RSM to be our internal auditor, and that firm will soon be conducting a risk assessment. And I feel like any move away from that plan would be duplicative and out of line with what this board has already decided to do. I know we've talked about our way of work and revisiting issues that have already been decided. This to me, any concerns that were addressed in that email will be addressed by the internal audit that we're on the precipice of completing, or at least beginning. So I just wanted to throw that comment out there. And if it's okay with you, I'll open it for second comments, and then we'll seek consensus regarding the board attorney.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anybody have second comments? I know Ms. Gittens, you had your hand up.
Let her go first. She hasn't gone at all, so.
Yeah, I had actually comments earlier, but, so, I'm sorry, Ms. Millay, you said the invoices were for what kind of services? Because,
I'm not sure I referenced invoices at all.
well, earlier, I mean, just a little while ago, you mentioned the maintenance and stuff. So what exactly was that?
So there's a list in your packet, and it's been shared with you previously, and I think you and I reviewed it at the one-on-one many months ago when it first came up. And we went through the examples that showed the type of service that was performed, the reason why it was performed, and why we paid for it with the category that we paid for it with.
Right.
Right, so, but, okay, so I'm looking at the audit and finding, and it says deep cleaning, gymnasiums, and room cleaning. That is not considered maintenance. That's why the auditor is disagreeing with how that was paid, because it should have fell under not the
Right,
capital, and now asking for, it should have been under operations.
Right, so-
That's my understanding?
So the deep cleaning was mold remediation. By statute, we are required, and in our response in the audit that was delivered last fall, our response indicated that per the statute that we are required to remove mold from our classrooms, an invoice might have said a wipe down. In fact, we contacted the indoor air quality vendor, who is a certified mold remediator, and asked them to wipe down with biocides to remove mold. And so an invoice would say wipe down of a classroom when the mold remediator was called, and therefore we were performing mold remediation services, which is a maintenance function.
Okay, I think that's what the auditor is referring to. I think that's the difference.
Just to give you an example, there is a list in your packet, but like one, in Edison Park, deep cleaning for unidentified growth throughout the boys and girls restrooms. Indoor air quality department supervisor recommends exhaust fan systems to be installed to purge possible gas exposure causing unidentified green growth. So, you can look down there in terms of what the different types of actions are. And, again, I think this is something that it'll be good for us to work with the Department of Education to get further clarification, because I think this has just been an area of the law that there has been some ambiguity. And but at this point, we do feel that you're talking about kind of a maintenance of a capital asset and the safety and security of children. So that's the argument that we're trying to present.
And the bottom line is we will categorize it and pay for it with the way that whoever's in charge currently advises us to do that. That changes a lot.
I lost my thought, but go ahead, I guess, at this point.
Ms. Jordan?
Okay, And I know that we already had this conversation months ago regarding this whole situation. And the wiping down, there's 5 steps for proper mold remediation. And that is one of the procedures, is the wipe down. There is no specific name for it, it's just called wipe down. And all that is doing, it's wiping it down with a microbiotic something that is done before like a post-test.
Right.
But that's something that's required by the state. So by them doing that, I mean, they have to do that once the mold is taken out to make sure that there is nothing living, there's nothing else there for these kids. So I just wanted to put that out there because I did speak to someone who has a company regarding this.
Right. And you also have to test for that. There's a major testing that has to go before and after that.
You should have that, but we have certified
So if a
people.
certified mold remediation expert identifies mold growth, then that can be removed without taking a test, waiting 3 days for the test results, and then printing up and writing up the 17-page report that documents that, yes, in fact, it was mold.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of your statement? If a certified what?
If a certified mold remediator identifies, for example, they walk into a room and they see the baseboard and they pull it off and they see black mold growing, they can say, yes, as a certified mold remediator, I identify that as black mold, and the standard procedure for doing this is X, Y, and Z. They are not required to conduct the test, which costs money, to wait 3 days for the results, to write a report, which runs between 7 and 17 pages, then to indicate that now the mold can be remediated. Because they are experts in their field, they've identified visually inspected and identified the culprit that needs to be addressed and followed the standard procedures for remediation.
Ms. Fisher, did you have any first-round comments or questions?
No, I understand all of this. I've heard it before. Yeah,
Ms.
thank you.
Morgan, did you have any first-round? Ms. Giddens, I believe we're back to second comments.
Yes, first of all, I just wanted to say, Ms. Vaughn, you were asking about follow-up on this. The reason that I had suggested the document in this manner was to provide continuous follow-up, and that's why I asked to have it put on Google Docs so that we can see, for example, that we have submitted a report and then we're in the wait and see time. So that when we get another document, it's not like it's a surprise to everybody. It's that you can look on the sheet and see, we were waiting to get that response. So that's why the document was placed like it is. The other thing I wanted to say, 2 more things. One, when we present things to the public, and I know we talked here today about the fact of having to possibly have money withheld from our FEFP. And since that was on the letter, and the letter was given to the public, my suggestion is in the vein of transparency to mention that as well. And you've explained it, that we won't get to that point, as you were saying before, because we will comply with whatever we're asked. It would, I think, keep down some hysteria to be able to address everything that's on the letter. That was the third part. I know I got a lot of calls and requests about, well, you know, what happens if this happens? So my thing is, we've got to get out in front of situations. When the letter came out, there were 3 items mentioned about having to pay it back and you know, doing the next option and having it taken back. So let's just say that that's a policy. I mean, a possibility, give the explanation that you gave, because there are people that haven't heard the whole story and they will proceed to think, oh, we're hiding something. So the more we can get out ahead of things and give the full details, I think is better. Also, I have a question on the list that's here. And these questions have been asked of me as well. For example, the on the first page about the PE fields needing leveling and sodding to improve drainage. That's one, for example. On the next page, fill and regrade the baseball infield areas to prevent trip hazards. And then on the last page, maintaining football field after new turf is installed, and drainage improvement. Drainage improvement to me is kind of a stretch with the mold possibilities that we're, fixing draining so that we don't have the mold. I kind of get that, but I'm not sure where these others would fit.
Right. So the complete list that we've provided to you are those items that are not specifically mold-related. So this is not an issue about managing mold. This issue is this list of sampling. So we sampled 11% of all projects that were done for the year. A statistical average would be to sample 3 to 5%. We sampled 11% of those projects paid for with these funds and identified some of them happened to be related to mold. And I think that topic was covered because there was a separate finding related to mold. So they said, well, here are some mold-related topics. And removing paint, repairing trip and fall hazards were all things that were also on that list. This was not a list targeted at mold remediation. So this is a comprehensive list of all of the things that were paid for with that funding. And then what we have is a very small snippet, just maybe, 25 words of what the project was for each of the 200 or so items that were listed, which is just a snippet of what the actual work was, and somebody gleaned from invoices or from work orders that were issued to perform the work. So this is the comprehensive list of those things with snippets of information, and if there are questions, we provided this so that if there were additional questions on specific ones, in fact, the district took it upon ourselves to highlight the one or two that we thought might be most questionable, and even addressed that in our response and said, you might question, why is repairing a football field considered maintenance? When it was reported to us that there was a football practice and a student was running and tripped, the coach or the athletic person identified it that needed to be fixed so that no injuries would occur, and so we issued a work order and we went and repaired that. So that's kind of the life of how those things happen, and that was the funding that was used to repair that. Anything that endangers students is a life to safety issue, and so that was the category of funding that was used to pay this, was maintenance of life to safety issues.
Okay, so let me ask the specific question. On the one on, I guess it's the last page, for Fort Myers High School, it says maintain football field after new turf is installed. And it's $10,956. Is this, since it's on this list, a potential of being one of the things that we paid for that we are going to have to pay back or move from operational to capital if they see this on this list?
Yes, we were transparent and provided this list of the items that we believe they would be interested in seeing, so we provided them to them. I don't know the full details of each of the items on this, that the maintenance department would know that. And so the items on this list are some of the things that were paid for with those funds, and yes, these are the things that are being questioned, everything on this list.
Okay, so there is the potential that if nothing else, we might have to pay that $10,956 for that item if they don't accept it.
Well, we performed the work, so we will need to pay for it. It was a service that was required, we'll pay for it, and the question is which pot of money pays for it.
Yes, the possibility exists that we would transfer those dollars from one pot to another. The services have already been paid for, but
Right,
yes, the
they've already
possibility.
been paid.
Right, yes, but the
So you may
possibility
have to
exists of the
transfer
transfer.
it.
That's right.
As long as we do the transfer and use our reserves for the difference, then we don't run into that last option of having to be
That's correct.
shorted for our 1920 school year.
Of getting those dollars deducted from our FEFP, yes, that's correct. That's correct. You do the transfer, there is no deduction from your FEFP. That's right.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Vaughn?
Yes, and this is a revisit, but to quote something Ms. Gittens said just a little while ago, all of these things were brought up, I believe, in January is when I believe they were brought up. And frankly, at the time, I know you and I had discussions, and when Mr. Blurton was here, I had a discussion with him as well. Frankly, I'm not surprised that these came back as questionable. And I mean, I can touch on so many of these, and the big area that I say is questionable is why on some of these, I'm not talking about proven mold remediation that's a hazard to our staff. However, something like remove an existing planter by the office in Skyline and install sod. We have a landscape crew, and this was at a cost of over $4,100, almost $4,200 by American Management Resource Corporation, one of our vendors. And my question is, and this, it was in January, and it's still a question now, and apparently it's a question by the Department of Education, is why were we using specialty vendors that charge so much more than our own crews when we have a huge landscaping crew? I never have really gotten a good answer to that.
So for that particular one, we have a vendor who is on the mold remediation contract and who is also on another contract that we have. And so the services provided here are from many contracts. They are not just from the mold remediation contract. So I think it's called site improvement, and sod replacement is one of the items which we outsource, and that vendor is awarded. So therefore, when we had a requirement to have sod laid, we contracted the awarded vendor who performs that function to do the work.
Okay, but I understand that, but couldn't this work have been done more cheaply by the staff that we have from maintenance department, since we have a huge landscaping crew?
And I don't know the specifics of that particular example, so I don't know that we can speak to that right now. But one of the things that we want to make sure that we do, which would lead us to our next discussion, hopefully, is to work with the board attorneys on each one of those things so that we can, break down a very good response for the DOE. So I don't know that on this list that we can talk specifics of each specific circumstance right now.
Okay, and I'm not questioning that it's mold remediation or not. What I'm questioning is, because as a school board member, I have a fiduciary duty to the taxpayers. And if we're paying almost $4,200 for this one service to a specialty vendor, and we can do it more cheaply, which it stands to reason we can, with our own maintenance department. And if we have too many people in maintenance, maybe we don't need as many. That's.
So I would
not sure, you're not answering my specific question on that.
Right, and I'm
Dr. Atkins?
Attempt to do that, but I also think that what I would like to be able to do is to provide you follow-up so I can more thoroughly answer that question. So the short answer to the question is that there are responsibilities that particular department has to carry on a day-to-day basis. For example, the mowing of the lawns, the yards, the school facilities. So maintaining that, they do tree trimming, that type of work. There is other work that is over and above just the general landscaping that occurs, the mowing of the grass and the taking care of the grounds, that we do outsource, particularly as it relates to specific or non-traditional items that we do not do on a day-to-day basis. An example of that would be laying sod. They don't typically, to my knowledge, lay sod. So I think what would help the board is probably have a little bit more of an in-depth discussion, and I could ask Mr. Pratt to help me with this, because part of what he's doing right now is looking at those types of things. You know, what is the balance that we have between the contracts that we have going on for external services that are provided, and what are the day-to-day activities of the maintenance department, as an example. And so I would be happy to bring that back to the board to give you a more thorough response to that. I know that's kind of the short of it, but I'll work with him
Yeah,
to do that.
it was back in January, and I never felt like I got a good response there. Perhaps I can request that Mr. Flock do a briefing with us and highlight the different departments and exactly what you were talking about, so I can have a better understanding of that.
Absolutely. Another example is the equipment that they have. They don't have all the equipment that some of these vendors have, and so that's another thing that they would do. But we'd be happy to do that for you.
So a briefing from Mr. Flock would be, I think, resolve some of my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
Ms. Von Ark?
sorry, I didn't want to
I'm done.
interrupt anybody.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
So I'm sitting here wondering why we've spent, I don't know how many minutes, with individuals at this table who know nothing, who are not subject matter experts with respect to the documents that are being discussed, questioning subject matter experts, both within the board, both within the district and the Department of Education. I just don't understand how it's our job at this point to take a statement about something that was done and do a deep dive into that, request. I mean, it seems to me that at the end of this investigation or audit or whatever, there is a resolution. The resolution is that the district did or did not accurately interpret the categorization of a particular item according to state statute or the Department of Education regulations. At that point, if we have been found as a district to be doing it incorrectly, then it's a board matter. Then we should be asking the questions about process and who's making the decision and are they qualified and are we spending money in the wrong way because we're not staffing maintenance correctly or we're not providing appropriate resources. I'm just flabbergasted that we're sitting here doing this. Maybe I'm the only one, but I got to put it out there.
Ms. Giovanni?
So I think I can help with that, Kathleen. The letter actually says, in addition to your letter, did not address the updated policies and procedures that enhance the district's accountability over an ad valorem tax proceeds, as requested in December 7th, 2018. So I think that was actually where I was going to go with this, is my question is, and look back to the attorney and the superintendent and say, what policies can we do to make sure that we're doing things right? So I think that is what we can do. And if our policies aren't updated, and this goes back from their December, they asked for this in December 7th, 2018. So I wasn't aware of the December letter until now. So I want to, first of all, thank you very much for this. I can't wait to understand this better. So I really, really appreciate that. So I think that is what we can do, is make sure our policies are in line with the state, so.
But we can't do that until we know something and we know nothing.
But why did the state ask for that to be, they wanted that in there from December 7th?
So
Comment on the record.
if I can, maybe I can help with that, because that's one of the things that we wanted to do, and we're awaiting for the consensus and the go-ahead to work with the board attorneys, because that's one of the things that we'll do, right? We have the process and procedure right now is, you know, we in the financial area, so headed up by me, we source the funding for all of these, right? The departments will request things that they need. Based on what it is that they need, we source we place the funding source. So the department really has no control over where the funding source is. So headed up by me, we place the funding source. So we work with all the understanding that we have of what the items are going to be to place what we believe is the correct funding source based on our understanding of the statute. So what we, of course, would like to do is work with our board attorneys to dissect this particular finding, the statutes behind each of these, come up with a very comprehensive response to the letter from the DOE, and then based on that, really document what our collective understandings are of how we will move forward based on understandings of the statutes, what is okay, and what we will do as a district and what we won't do as a district, because that would be under my responsibility to make sure that we have those proper procedures in place. Reading the statute and interpretation of the statute to make sure that we are in alignment with what our auditors will find acceptable. So that would be our next step in addressing what it is that you're asking.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have any additional?
No, I think that's.
Ms. Fisher?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Ms. Jordan?
No.
We had a first round and then a second round, so I was going to finish up with my
We
second.
haven't agreed. You said you were going to
I
bring
understand,
that
but
up.
I was going to make my second round of comments, and then I was going to seek consensus. My second round of comments is simply, Ms. Gittens, you indicated that we want to get ahead of things before they get out of control, so to speak, before there's any alarm in the community, and I agree with that entirely, but I believe that an email was sent to 20 community members to include our state delegation and the news outlets regarding this before we had information as a board, before we had an
Okay,
opportunity.
point of order, we're not
to sit at this
discussing
table
that. We're talking about this issue here.
and ask questions and get answers.
Point
And
of
I
order,
think
please.
It's important that we get those answers before
Madam-
we reach out to the public in that way.
Madam Chair, what is the member's point of order?
Well, my point of order is that we are not talking about who did what or accusing. We're trying to discuss the situation and where we're going forward. So whoever sent what is really irrelevant at this point.
Well, going forward, it would be helpful if we could gather all the information before reaching out to the public, I guess is my point. So I think, Dr. Desmores, you're asking for consensus from the board to work with the board attorneys to utilize their services and pay for those services to complete this, yes? Is that fair? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that is fair. Yes.
Is the board
that is.
ready to?
I have a comment before we do that, please. I'm not ready to do consensus. I need to make a comment on that. May I go ahead?
Of course.
Okay. We are in the process of coming up with our protocol for our attorneys. We're having a workshop coming up, I believe, in a couple of weeks, where we will be deciding and defining what our attorneys will do in relationship to what the district attorneys will do. And so my suggestion is, because of the urgency of this, yes, to go ahead for them to use our attorneys, with the caveat that when we come up with our protocol and job description for the attorney, which we will be working on, that this will be revisited. This is not something that I would agree that's just a blanket statement that they will work with the district on items.
I don't think that that's what I'm asking for consensus for. I'm asking for the completion of this specific project.
Okay.
Do we have consensus? Thumbs up?
Do you have
Thumbs
another
down?
comment?
What project?
The completion of our response to the DOE with regard to the Auditor General's findings.
Well, they have till the 31st, so I think we really can't make any decisions.
We're seeking consensus to have the board attorneys that we've hired work with staff to put together a response that includes specific reference to statute with regard to the work that we've done.
We're doing that anyways.
No, they did not go ahead without the board's approval to use the board's attorney to work with staff. So they took the extra step of being cautious and not moving ahead with that without board consensus to do so. Mr. Attorney Bierman.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to clarify that so far, our role has been to be the eyes of this board, the board itself, with respect to things that, have legal bearing on the board's duties and obligations and activities. And so with respect to a recent response that was prepared regarding Head Start, for example, we were provided with information. We took an independent look at it. My partner, Eric Hockman, who's a trial lawyer and an experienced investigative lawyer, went through and verified all the information that was supplied to us, and then put the response into the appropriate format for transmission to the chair for her signature and ultimately to the requester. And so I believe that's what we're being asked to do, which I think is an appropriate and customary role for the board's attorney. I don't think from what I understand, it's not outside of what Mr. Dodig or his predecessor would have done under the same circumstances. If there is a concern on this board that our involvement at that stage would somehow prevent us from giving the board an independent review at some later time, that's understood, and some other attorneys could fulfill the responsibility that they're talking about. You could go outside if you wanted to do that. I don't think that's an issue for us. We're going to be independent. We're going to be your eyes and ears no matter what, and no matter when we're involved in the process. But if you have that kind of concern, that's fine. I mean, we really don't have any personal skin in the game. We're here to assist you as you need to be assisted.
So are you indicating that the contract that we have or the retainer that we have with you doesn't require this board to approve work with staff on this specific issue?
My understanding is historically it didn't, but now it's a little bit of a different situation because Mr. Dodig was paid by the year and we're paid by the hour. But I also know that if we're paid by the hour, at any outside counsel that Mr. Williams hired is paid by the hour. So it's kind of 6 and 1, half dozen the other with respect to cost, I think.
And we didn't take a consensus on the Head Start. They just, so I.
Okay.
Because it was being prepared for the chair's signature, it was appropriate for us to prepare the response.
Comfortable moving ahead without board consensus, Dr. Atkins?
Yeah, I mean, historically, we've always worked with the board attorney on these types of items. I mean, this is a district matter that involves all of us, and we want to comply with the Department of Education's request.
Do you feel comfortable, Dr. Desamores?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We're very anxious to begin work. So, we brought the question forward because we were asked to do so, but we're ready to move forward with if we can do so.
Fantastic. All right, I hate to cut you off, but we are at 4:34 and we have a hard stop of 4:45, so we really need to move on to the next item on the agenda.
Yes. I'm sorry. May I make just one more comment and clarify something? And I apologize. I just want to make sure that I put in this clarification because I think it's important. On finding number 2 that we've been talking about for a little bit, the original finding that we received from the auditors when they were first here, because remember I said we go back and forth to knock some things off, the original finding was actually 4.2 million. This list that we're referencing that we see in here was actually a list from the auditors of items that they removed from the finding. So they actually accepted these, and we have now minus 300,000, because this is about 300,000, 3.9 million left of still question costs. These aren't, these were ones that actually the auditors accepted and removed them from the original 4.2 million, leaving 3.9 million left, okay? So I did want to clarify that because I, kind of misspoke on one of those items, so I apologize for that. There were many lists going back and forth. This one is the one that they actually accepted and removed from the finding, leaving us 3.9 million. So I hope that that is clear. I apologize for that.
All right, great. And we're going to jump to insurance because this is an item we will have to vote on at our next meeting, I believe. And briefing us on that is
Yeah, it's
essential heading
critical
into
that we do the insurance briefing at this time.
Okay,
FEMA
thank
is a
you.
work in progress, so
Yep, thank you. We'll proceed.
So you can add that to our next briefing?
yes, I'll work
Great,
with the
thank
chair
you.
to do that, yes.
You can wait there. Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Atkins, board members. We appreciate the time constraints, but we want to make sure that you have all the appropriate information or have the opportunity to ask questions that you might have relative to our property and casualty insurance renewal for FY20. So we're going to get right to it. Bonnie McFarland, Director of Insurance and Benefits, and Michelle Martin here from Brown & Brown, and we're just going to get right into it so we can get to your questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Bonnie McFarland. I'm the Director of Insurance and Benefits for the district. Thank you for your time today. This slide is just a quick overview of the district. You guys are aware we're a very large district. Two items on this slide I want to bring to your attention is as we talk about the renewal. The bulk of the renewal is relative to property, and the district has over 1,000 buildings, 159 of which are in a special flood hazard zone. And our building and contents value is over $2.2 billion. So it's a big item to cover. We do purchase a wide variety of insurances, both property and liability. We also work with Michelle and the Brown & Brown team to place some insurances that the district doesn't pay for, but that are paid for through the special programming, such as the medical professional liability for the students at FMIT and CCTC. And I will turn it over to Michelle to walk through the renewal.
I'm Michelle Martin. I manage all of the property and casualty insurance brokerage services provided to the district. I'm employed with Brown & Brown, which is one of the world's top 10 largest insurance intermediaries. And as such, we deliver world-class service and resources to the district. We serve the district via a specialty office that's branded Public Risk Insurance Advisors, or PRIA. We only serve public entities in the state of Florida and currently represent over 125 municipalities, counties, and school districts within the state. PRIA provides the district with many types of services throughout the year. We provide various risk management and insurance-related services. But in December, we really ramp up to negotiate the July 1st insurance renewals. So we do quite a bit of communication with both your staff and the underwriting community, basically at the end to provide our proposal that we're bringing to you today. We did have a little bit of challenge in the 2019 insurance marketplace, particularly for Florida catastrophic exposed assets, and for entities that have had losses from hurricanes that have occurred over the past 3 years. We had a little bit of rate increase and difficulties with terms and conditions. However, we've been able to negotiate a very satisfactory property renewal for you. In order to do this, we accessed over 43 insurance companies, both domestic and in the international market. And what we presented to you, all of the insurance companies have been evaluated, and we only bring exceptional companies with financial strength and stability.
So that brings us to our recommendation, which we will be bringing to you for a vote at the June 4th meeting, which is the renewal of the property and casualty insurances for a not-to-exceed amount of $7,837,903, and the breakdown there between the property coverage and the casualty or liability coverage. is below. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Gittens?
Where is the insurance that we used when we had the error in the best and brightest? And we had a, I can't remember
Errors
what
and
to call
omissions.
it. Right, errors and omissions insurance. Where is that?
No, you can tell her where it falls under, so she knows.
So it would fall under the errors and omissions. The school leader's professional and employment practice liability is the specific name of that coverage.
Okay, I mean, is it in,
Yes,
am I
ma'am.
missing it?
Did you break it out?
It's under that umbrella.
It's under the casualty piece of the I'm sorry, this is a slow.
That's okay. Maybe I just haven't gotten to it. That's fine.
Go forward one.
Yeah.
Go forward two.
Oh, sorry.
This way.
Let's just do this.
No, up
As a
front.
note, as I'm getting here, the district's policies are all reinsurance or what's called excess. So we do have a certain level of what's called self-insured retention. It's kind of like a deductible on all of the district's policies. So the casualty line here where it says casualty with a dollar amount of $758,712, the school leaders would fall under that line item.
Other questions, comments? I know that this was really brief and abbreviated, so I really just want to make sure that there's nothing burning on our minds going into our meeting in 2 weeks. I mean, I read the backups and I felt super comfortable with what you had presented. I just want to make sure we're good to go in a couple weeks. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry it was so.
Thank you.
I don't think we have time for our board member reports or comments. Dr. Atkins, is there anything you'd like to say heading into the action meeting tonight?
No, like I said, we'll come back with FEMA if that's okay with the board. That way we can spend the time that you need to spend on that, but no other comments.
Attorney Bierman?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to let you know that I didn't receive any public comment cards for the briefing. I didn't receive any cards, but apparently there is a member of the audience that wishes to make a public comment.
Microphone.
Since there's only one member of the audience, the public comment time will be 3 minutes.
Please approach the microphone. Please complete a comment card when you're done so that we have it for our records.
My name is Randy Scott. I was watching and I had it down. I wanted to focus on insubordination, which one of the talked about. When you have an insubordinate child at the school, it creates disruption, and I think you have that insubordination at the top. It creates disruption. The ballot language that Ms. Desamore talked about, all she said to you, it's good. That's all. And everybody just walked on by. The ballot language isn't good. Does it in there say that you can issue a bond? Nobody's going to check it. You're just going to do it. Procure.
Could you pause your comments for 1 second, or for just a
Well,
moment while I
I would
ask a
appreciate
question
if you
of
let me
Attorney
finish.
Bierman? Attorney Bierman, do comments during briefing meetings have to be on agenda items only?
Comments during briefing meetings are restricted to comments regarding items on the agenda.
I would ask you to please keep your comments directed only to agenda items.
Board
Ballot
Attorney, if you
language is
can,
not.
if you can correct me, didn't I preference each one of these with discussions that was occurring here today?
Has asked that you restrict your comments to items on the agenda, so.
Items did I just discuss that were not on the agenda or part of the
Complete your
discussion?
comments.
What's that?
Please complete your comments as associated with the agenda.
Which items, so I can get good direction, are you saying that was not on today's discussion and agenda? I need that direction from you. Which,
I'm not going to get into a back and forth with you, Mr. Scott. Please complete your comments.
okay. How much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
The ballot language was discussed during the comments by Ms. Desamore. That ballot language does not comply with law. It does not comply with the bonding issue that you're going to issue in 2 weeks,
It does not say in there that you can bond for future tax receipts. It's not there. It is not there. Everyone just walked right by it and said, it's okay. And all she said was, yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good. If all you're going to do is say and accept, yeah, it's good, then yeah, you're bad. You have more obligations than that. The procurement that was discussed today, we discussed procurement too. I went to the procurement session today for the landscaping contract. That was today at 10 o'clock. I was here, I filmed it. I talked to the vendors. The district's a mess. These vendors you should contact, you should talk to them. There's a lot of good vendors out there, not just the ones that are milking the system. I've talked to them, we laughed, it was funny. They thought it was completely disorganized. How can you bid on something you ain't gonna know what you're gonna get? And then we talked about an attorney conflict is what we were discussing earlier. And I think there is an attorney conflict. I think he is the board attorney. I don't think he should take directions from anyone other than this board. On December 11th when I was here, I gave you a letter that should have been entered into the record, Madam Chair. I put it up here, you can look on the video. You destroyed it. It was relating to Dodick. And I'll talk more about that later. Thank you for your time.
Okay, with a hard stop of 5:45 or 4:45, we're 1 minute late. This meeting is adjourned.